After 15 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my husband, Briston. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at his own jokes, how he'd loosen his tie the moment he walked through our front door, the familiar scent of his coffee breath during our morning goodbye kisses. But one receipt, a single piece of paper tucked between credit card statements, shattered everything I thought I knew about the man I'd built my life with. I remember that morning with painful clarity. February 14th, 2024. Valentine's Day. The irony still makes me sick to my stomach. I was at my desk in our home office, sorting through the monthly bills like I always did on Wednesday mornings before heading to the real estate office. The morning sun streamed through the bay windows, casting a warm glow over the mahogany desk Briston and I had picked out together when we first moved in. Everything felt normal, routine, safe. Then I saw it. A cream-colored receipt from Winston & Company Jewelers, dated just 3 days earlier. My heart skipped a beat, then started racing. Winston & Company wasn't just any jewelry store. It was the most exclusive boutique in the city, where engagement rings started at 5 figures. My fingers trembled as I picked up the receipt, hoping to see a gift for me. An anniversary surprise, perhaps. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. 18-karat rose gold diamond tennis bracelet, $12,500. Below it, a handwritten note, her request, initials removed. The receipt slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Briston and I shared all our accounts. We made every major purchase decision together. That was our agreement, our foundation of trust. Yet here was proof of a 5-figure purchase I knew nothing about, for jewelry that wasn't meant for me. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but memories started flooding in. The late nights at the office, the mysterious business trips that seemed to multiply over the past few months, the way he'd been guarding his phone lately, always keeping it face down. All these little things I'd dismissed, rationalized, ignored. They were suddenly rearranging themselves in my mind like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how my perfect marriage began unraveling that Valentine's Day morning, we need to go back 2 months. Back to when Briston first mentioned his new business partner, and I was still blissfully blind to the signs that had been right in front of me all along. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on stories like mine. It was December 15th, 2023. The night everything started to change, though I didn't know it then. We were at our favorite restaurant, celebrating another record-breaking quarter at my real estate firm. The candlelight played across Briston's face as he raised his glass of wine, pride shining in his eyes as he toasted my success. If only I'd known that behind that loving smile, he was already keeping secrets that would tear our world apart. That December evening at Maple and Ash felt like the last perfect moment of my marriage. The restaurant's warm glow matched the contentment in my heart as I sipped my Cabernet, watching Briston's animated expression as he shared his latest work news. Our table overlooking Michigan Avenue gave us a pristine view of the holiday lights dotting the magnificent mile, and snow was just beginning to dust the sidewalks below. From the outside, we were living the dream. Our Tudor-style home in Hinsdale was the envy of our social circle, with its sprawling garden that bloomed magnificently in spring. Every Sunday, we hosted dinner parties, where Briston would show off his culinary skills while I mixed cocktails for our guests. Our Christmas cards showed a couple still madly in love after 15 years. Him with his distinguished salt and pepper hair, me with the smile that had helped me close countless real estate deals. "I think you'll really like her, honey," Briston said, cutting into his Wagyu steak. "Claire's brilliant with commercial properties. She just closed that massive deal on the Willis Tower renovation project." I nodded, only half listening as I mentally reviewed my own upcoming listings. "That's great, sweetie. We could use more commercial expertise in the firm." "She's got fresh ideas about modernizing our approach," he continued. his eyes lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. Did you know she developed her own property management software? Could revolutionize how we handle our portfolio. Something in his tone made me look up from my risotto. There was an enthusiasm there that felt different, but I brushed it aside. Briston had always been passionate about innovation in the business. The changes were so subtle at first, I almost didn't notice them. In January, he replaced his entire wardrobe, switching from his usual Brooks Brothers to sleeker Italian cuts. "Time for an update," he'd said, when I commented on a particularly sharp new suit. "Claire mentioned this great tailor downtown." There was that name again, Claire. Then came the late nights. Real estate had always demanded irregular hours, but this was different. 3, sometimes 4 nights a week, he'd text that he was stuck in meetings. When he did come home, his phone would buzz constantly with notifications he'd quickly dismiss before I could glimpse the screen. "Just work stuff," he'd say with a dismissive wave, turning his phone face down on the kitchen counter. The same phone that used to lie carelessly on our coffee table, open to my casual glances. I first met Claire at our annual company gala in late January. She stood out immediately, tall, poised, and impossibly put together in a red designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Her handshake was firm as she smiled warmly at me. "Brenda, I've heard so much about you," she exclaimed, her green eyes sparkling. "Briston never stops singing your praises." But it was the way Briston stood next to her that caught my attention. The slight angle of his body toward hers, the way his hand briefly touched her elbow as he introduced us. Subtle things that felt off, like a picture hanging slightly crooked on a wall. After that, I couldn't help but notice her presence everywhere. She was at every office meeting, every client dinner, every industry event. Always perfectly styled, always with that brilliant smile, always standing just a little too close to my husband. Her laughter would carry across the room at his jokes. Her hand would linger a moment too long on his arm during conversations. "Claire thinks" became a regular phrase at our dinner table. Claire's opinion on market trends, Claire's suggestions about client presentations, Claire's ideas about everything. Her name wove itself into the fabric of our daily lives so gradually that I didn't realize how much space it was taking up until it was everywhere. One night in early February, I was waiting up for Briston, trying to focus on the novel in my hands, but really just watching the clock tick past midnight. When he finally came home, his collar was slightly askew, and he smelled of unfamiliar perfume. "Sorry, love," he said, loosening his tie. "Claire and I had to finish the Morrison proposal. Lost track of time." I watched him climb the stairs to our bedroom, my stomach churning with an unease I couldn't quite name. In that moment, I remembered something my mother once told me. "Trust your instincts, Brenda. When something feels wrong, it usually is." But I wasn't ready to face what my instincts were trying to tell me. Not yet. After all, we were Briston and Brenda Mitchell, Chicago's power couple in real estate. We had the perfect life, the perfect marriage. Didn't we? Looking back now, I want to shake my past self, point out every red flag I was so determined to ignore. But hindsight has a cruel way of making the obvious even more painful to remember. It was a random Instagram scroll that made my world tilt on its axis. I was mindlessly flipping through photos on a quiet Sunday afternoon when I saw it. A post from the Peninsula Chicago's rooftop restaurant. There, in the background of someone's brunch selfie, were Briston and Claire, heads bent close together over what looked like documents. Their Sunday business attire conspicuous among the casual brunching crowds. The timestamp showed it was from the previous weekend, when Briston had told me he was meeting with the Anderson family about their lakefront property listing. Just the Andersons, he'd said, nothing about Claire. My finger hovered over the photo as memories flooded back. The Sunday before that, he'd been showing properties in Highland Park. The weekend before, it was a private client meeting in Lincoln Park. Always on weekends, always alone, or so I'd thought. I found myself opening my laptop, pulling up our shared calendar, that we'd kept meticulously updated throughout our marriage. There it was, a pattern I'd been too blind to see. Sunday meetings, client names I'd never heard mentioned at dinner, appointments that never seemed to result in the deals or listings he'd vaguely reference later. The house felt too quiet as I waited for him to return that evening. Each tick of our antique grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to mock me, counting down to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. I'd always prided myself on being rational, level-headed, the woman who could negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I heard his key in the door. "How was your meeting with the Thompsons?" I asked casually as he hung up his coat, testing him with a name I'd just invented. "Productive," he replied without missing a beat. "They're interested in that new development by the lake." My heart sank. There was no meeting with the Thompsons. There never had been. "Funny," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "because I saw a photo of you and Claire at the peninsula today, posted last weekend." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. I watched as various expressions flickered across his face. Surprise, guilt, then something else I couldn't quite read before he composed himself. "Honey, it's not what you're thinking," he said, his voice taking on that soothing tone he used with nervous clients. "Claire has connections with major developers. We've been working on a huge commercial project, potentially the biggest deal our firm has ever seen. We didn't want to announce anything until it was more concrete." He sat down beside me on our leather sofa, reaching for my hand. His palm felt clammy against mine. "Remember that abandoned warehouse district we passed on the river last month? We're talking about a complete renovation. Luxury condos, retail space, maybe even a boutique hotel. But these developers are incredibly private. They insist on weekend meetings, away from office hours. Claire's been instrumental in getting them to the table." It sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Like a story that had been carefully crafted and rehearsed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, searching his face for something, anything that would quiet the doubt gnawing at my insides. "I didn't want to get your hopes up until it was more certain," he said, squeezing my hand. "You know how these big deals can fall through. Plus, with your focus on residential properties, I didn't want to burden you with the commercial side of things." Everything he said made logical sense. The explanations fit together perfectly, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But something felt off, like when you walk into your home and know someone's been there, even though nothing is visibly disturbed. "No more secrets," I said firmly, "even about potential deals. We're partners in this firm, in everything, remember?" "Of course, honey." He pulled me close, kissing my forehead. "No more secrets, I promise." I let myself melt into his embrace, trying to ignore the fact that his heart was beating faster than normal, that his cologne couldn't quite mask another scent, one that reminded me of the perfume Claire had worn at the office gala. That night, I lay awake long after Briston's breathing had evened into sleep. Everything had been explained. Everything made sense. So why did it feel like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to discover just how deep the darkness below really went? Little did I know, the receipt I would find a few weeks later would prove that sometimes the most carefully constructed explanations are built on foundations of lies. After our confrontation about the weekend meetings, I tried to believe Briston's explanations. I really did. But once doubt takes root, it grows like a weed, spreading through every corner of your mind until it chokes out all the trust you've carefully tended over the years. I found myself doing something I never thought I would, keeping a detailed log of my husband's movements. It started small, just notes in my phone, dates, times, locations he mentioned, but soon it evolved into something more comprehensive. I created a spreadsheet, my real estate background kicking in, as I tracked patterns with the same precision I used for market analyses. The first red flag appeared when I cross-referenced his client meetings with our firm's database. Dinner at Gibson's Steakhouse with the Morrison Group. No such client in our records. A property viewing in Lake Forest for the Jang Family Trust. No listing agreement. No contact information. The supposedly huge warehouse development deal? Not a single permit application or preliminary paperwork filed with the city. But it was the recurring patterns that made my stomach churn. Every Wednesday, without fail, client dinners at Le Colonial. Always the same corner table by the window. I knew because I'd driven past once, telling myself I was being paranoid, only to see them there, Claire laughing at something Briston was saying, her hand resting on the table dangerously close to his. Their property viewings followed a pattern too. The Four Seasons, the Waldorf Astoria, the Peninsula, all luxury hotels with upscale restaurants and bars. Not exactly typical locations for commercial real estate meetings. Then came the texts. I wasn't proud of looking, but one morning, while Briston was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message preview from an unknown number lit up the screen. Missing our special spot already. Tuesday can't come soon enough. My hands shook as I added it to my growing document of evidence. A week later, another one. The view wasn't the same without you there. Each message was carefully worded, ambiguous enough to have an innocent explanation, yet loaded with undertones that made my skin crawl. I started documenting everything in a password-protected file I named Market Research 2024. Times, dates, screenshots I managed to take of suspicious messages before they mysteriously disappeared from his phone. I began tracking Claire's movements too. Her Instagram became my daily obsession. She was careful, never posting anything directly incriminating, but the locations were telling. A cocktail at the signature room, artfully photographed just hours after Briston had a late meeting. A sunrise yoga post from the lakefront on the same morning my husband went for an unusually early workout. One evening, I found myself creating a map of all their meeting spots, pinning locations like I was solving a crime. The pattern formed a perfect triangle between our office, her apartment in River North, and a cluster of high-end hotels. I felt like I was losing my mind, transforming from a successful businesswoman into some kind of amateur detective. But the most damning evidence came from our company credit card statements. Briston had always handled that side of the business, but now I went through them with a fine-toothed comb. Multiple charges at high-end restaurants, always for two people. A pattern of hotel parking charges that didn't correspond with any client meetings in our official records. Small things, easily explained away, but forming a damning pattern when viewed together. I created a timeline, cross-referencing everything. Late meetings, weekend property viewings, mysterious texts, hotel charges. Each piece of evidence on its own could be dismissed, but together they told a story I wasn't ready to accept. The worst part was maintaining a facade of normalcy. Every morning, I'd kiss him goodbye like nothing was wrong. Every evening, I'd listen to his stories about work, nodding at all the right moments while mentally cataloging each inconsistency, each slip in his carefully constructed narrative. I became hyper-aware of every detail, the way he'd step out to take certain phone calls, how he'd angle his laptop screen away from me while working from home. The subtle changes in his excuses, they were getting sloppier, as if he was growing confident in his deception. One night, as I updated my log with the day's observations, I caught my reflection in the darkened window of our home office. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, this suspicious, obsessive version of myself who spent her evenings documenting her husband's betrayal in meticulous detail. "What are you doing?" I whispered to my reflection, but I knew exactly what I was doing. I was building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for a moment I could feel approaching like a storm on the horizon. I just didn't know then that the jewelry store receipt would be the lightning bolt that finally broke everything open. I've always told my real estate clients that there's no such thing as a perfect hiding place. Eventually, every secret reveals itself. It's just a matter of knowing where to look. I never imagined I'd be using that knowledge to uncover my husband's double life. It started with a notification on our shared iPad, a storage-full warning for Briston's cloud account. He'd forgotten to log out, something so unlike his usually careful self that it made me pause. My finger hovered over the notification, my heart pounding against my ribs. Did I really want to know what I might find? I did. The first folder I opened seemed innocent enough. Work documents, contracts, nothing unusual. But then I noticed a folder labeled Property Investments 2023 to 2024. Being the co-owner of our real estate firm, I should have known about any property investments. Should have. My hands trembled as I opened the first document. It was a purchase agreement for a luxury condo in the new River Point Tower. But it wasn't under our company's name, or even Bristol's. The buyer was listed as Claire Morrison. I recognized the address. It was one of those client viewings from 3 months ago. Scrolling through more documents, my world began to crumble piece by piece. There weren't just property viewings happening during those weekend meetings. There were actual purchases. 5 properties in total, all under Claire's name, all in some of Chicago's most exclusive buildings. The payment records showed splits between 2 accounts. One I recognized as Claire's business account that we sometimes used for commission deposits, and another I didn't recognize. But it was the next folder that made my blood run cold. Personal, encrypted, it read. The password protection had failed when the cloud backup glitched. Inside was a collection of photos that turned my stomach inside out. Bristol and Claire at a beachfront resort in Maui. During the week, he'd told me he was at a real estate conference in Boston. Claire wearing a slinky black dress, raising a champagne glass in what I recognized as the peninsula's Shanghai Terrace. The same night Bristol said he had food poisoning and couldn't attend my firm's award ceremony. The 2 of them cozied up in a gondola in Venice. My God, that solo business trip to Europe 3 months ago. Each photo was like a knife to my heart, but I couldn't stop scrolling. The timestamps told a story of their own. This hadn't been going on for just a few months. The earliest photos dated back to last summer, right around when Claire first joined our firm. With shaking hands, I opened another folder labeled Future Plans. Inside was a business proposal that made me physically sick. They were planning to open their own boutique real estate firm, specializing in luxury properties. The document detailed how they would gradually transfer our highest value clients to their new venture. My clients. Our clients. But it was the personal email drafts that destroyed me completely. Love notes, future plans, discussions about how and when to handle the transition, their euphemism for ending his marriage to me. They had it all mapped out, down to which properties they would claim in the dissolution of our business partnership. I found myself clicking through hotel receipts, dozens of them. The Four Seasons, the Peninsula, the Waldorf. Every late meeting and business dinner meticulously documented in their private records. Restaurant bills for intimate dinners at places we used to call our spots. Airline tickets for trips I knew nothing about. Then, I found something that made everything else pale in comparison. A property deed for a lake house in Wisconsin, purchased 6 months ago under both their names. They had a whole other life together, a love nest just 2 hours away, while I was here believing his stories about client meetings and property viewings. I sat there in our home office, surrounded by the life we'd built together, watching it all turn to ashes. The photos, the receipts, the property documents, they painted a picture of not just an affair, but a carefully orchestrated plan to dismantle everything I thought we had. My phone buzzed. A text from Bristol. "Working late tonight, honey. Don't wait up." I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, at his smiling face promising forever. Then I looked back at the iPad, at the evidence of every lie, every betrayal, every calculated step away from our marriage. The man in our wedding photo was a stranger now, replaced by someone who could lead a double life with cold, methodical precision. I reached for my own phone and opened my investigation document. With trembling fingers, I added one final entry. February 14th, 2024. Found proof of everything. Happy Valentine's Day to me. The jewelry store receipt I would find later that morning wasn't just evidence of another gift for his mistress. It was the final confirmation that I needed. But sitting there, staring at years of lies laid bare on a glowing screen, I already knew our marriage was over. The only question left was how to confront the strangers my husband and his business partner had become. He flipped through the papers, his face growing paler. "You can't prove?" "I've already frozen the company accounts you were planning to drain next week. The property transfers you tried to hide? Documented and reported to the State Real Estate Commission? That lovely lake house you bought with Claire? Purchased with commingled funds during our marriage, which makes it marital property." Standing up, I smoothed down my skirt, the same one I'd worn to close my biggest deal last year. "You have two choices, Briston. Sign these papers and agree to a fair division of assets, or I take everything I've found to the licensing board and the DA's office. I'm sure they'd be very interested in some of these creative accounting practices you and Claire came up with." "You'd risk the whole firm's reputation?" he whispered. "The firm's reputation?" I picked up my briefcase. "The firm is already gone. You killed it the moment you decided to steal from it. What I'm offering you is a chance to walk away before I burn everything to the ground, including your real estate license and hers." I walked to the door, then turned back for one final look at the man I'd loved for 15 years. "You have 24 hours to decide. Oh, and that Valentine's Day dinner reservation you made at Alinea? I called and canceled it. I'm sure Claire will understand." The sound of my heels clicking down the hallway echoed like a judge's gavel. In my car, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Through my tears, I could see the lights of Chicago sparkling against the night sky, the same view that had once represented our shared dreams. Now it was just the backdrop for the next chapter of my story. One without Briston, without Claire, and without the weight of lies crushing my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer confirming that the emergency injunction was in place. I smiled through my tears. Briston wasn't the only one who could make plans. He'd just never expected his trusting wife to be better at it than him. 6 months later, I stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, watching the Chicago sunrise paint the sky in shades of possibility. The sign on the building lobby now reads, "Mitchell and Associates Luxury Real Estate." No other names. No shadows of past betrayals. Just mine. The divorce was finalized last month. Briston signed the papers the day after our confrontation. Turns out the threat of losing his real estate license was more persuasive than any emotional appeal. Claire disappeared from Chicago's real estate scene shortly after. Though not before, I discovered something that made me realize I wasn't the first wife whose life she'd upended. It came in an unmarked envelope, delivered to my office 3 weeks after the confrontation. Inside were newspaper clippings and court documents from real estate firms in Boston, Seattle, and Miami. Each told a similar story. Claire Morrison would join a successful firm, partner with a married male executive, and within a year, both the marriage and the company would implode. She was a professional honeypot, targeting successful real estate partnerships and leaving devastation in her wake. The package was sent by another woman, Jennifer Chen, from the Boston firm. "I was too ashamed to warn anyone when she moved to Chicago," her note read. "I'm not staying quiet anymore. I've learned that shame is the weapon they use to keep us silent. But I'm done being silent." The story of how my husband and his business partner tried to destroy everything I'd built isn't just about betrayal. It's about recognizing your own worth before someone else tries to diminish it. My new firm is thriving. Turns out clients appreciate working with someone who values transparency above all else. The irony isn't lost on me that losing everything I thought I needed helped me build something stronger than I ever imagined. Yesterday, I received another unexpected delivery, a USB drive containing emails between Claire and someone at a real estate firm in Houston. They're planning the same scheme again. She hasn't learned her lesson, but I have learned mine. I pick up my phone and dial Jennifer Chen's number. It's time to build a different kind of partnership, one that will ensure Claire Morrison never destroys another woman's life again. Some people might say I should just move on, focus on my success, and leave the past behind. But sometimes moving forward means making sure the path is safer for those who come after you. As I watch the city wake up below me, I think about how easy it is to mistake a reflection for reality. My marriage looked perfect on the surface, until I learned to look deeper. Now I know that true strength isn't in maintaining appearances. It's in being willing to shatter them to find the truth. My phone buzzes with a text from Jennifer. Houston deal is set. Ready when you are? I smile, thinking of Claire's face when she realizes her past is about to catch up with her future. Some business partnerships are built on deception, but the ones built on justice? Those are unshakable. Opening my laptop, I begin typing, "To the Texas Real Estate Commission." Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, it's protecting others from the pain you endured. They say karma comes for everyone eventually, but sometimes karma needs a little help from a woman who's learned to trust her instincts and isn't afraid to use them. The sunrise is complete now, a new day dawning over Chicago. And somewhere in Houston, Claire Morrison is about to learn that her next perfect opportunity comes with a price she never expected to pay. After all, hell hath no fury like a realtor scorned. What would you have done in my shoes? If you discovered your spouse's business partner was actually a professional marriage wrecker with a history of destroying families, would you expose everything? Would you warn her next target? Or would you keep the evidence to yourself? Tell me your thoughts. What steps would you have taken? And if you've been through something similar, remember, you're not alone. Drop a heart emoji if you think I made the right choice by exposing everything.